Mr. County Democrat, and he is joining us in the studio tonight. Thanks for being here.
Liz, it's a pleasure to be here.
And I actually think this is the first time you've been here with me.
This is my first.
Your first voyage. Welcome. Okay. This is actually seems to be sort of crazy, but it's not. $10 billion is a huge gap to fill. A lot of people are afraid to say to Andrew Cuomo, $10 billion, where are you going to cut it from? But you have not actually been silent about that.
No. I say $10 billion is an enormous amount of money, and given the fact that we've already been cutting in the past 2 years, we reduced education $2 billion this year, and they're at a point now that we really can't cut too much from them. People talk about our budget, $130 billion, and is it a large? Yes, it's a large budget, excuse me, but we're a large state, and 70% of our overall budget, or $91 billion, goes to aid to localities. That includes school aid as well as Medicaid. That's the bulk of our budget. We can't cut school aid. That's not going to happen. We can't cut school aid again. The new health care law actually creates more people eligible for Medicaid. Right. It's raising the eligibility from 100% of poverty to 133% of poverty, and there's a maintenance of effort caveat in there where we can't cut what we're paying people. Now, Medicaid is counter-cyclical. When times get bad, it's more need for the Medicaid program, so we're going to have to actually put more money into that program.
Okay, there was a Wall Street Journal report this week that suggested that Governor Cuomo wanted to cut, and he has neither confirmed nor denied this actually, but $2.1 billion from Medicaid. But then in the next paragraph it says, actually, if that is done, it really just freezes Medicaid spending. It's not actually a cut. It is a freeze of the growth of Medicaid spending. Yes. That has occurred. And also in the same story suggests that the state might go to the federal government and ask for a waiver, which would be seeking more money from the federal government. They're not going to do it.
They're not going to do that.
Okay.
And if the governor cuts $2 billion, that blows out to $8 billion because that's the state's portion.
Yep.
The counties pay another $2 billion, and the feds will pay $4 billion. So that's an $8 billion cut to the health system in the state of New York.
Okay, but what about reducing services? In other words, that you do cover more people, but you offer them less of what you are covering, for example, or managed care for people who have very difficult cases that are not currently there. That's doable.
That's doable, but how much are we going to save there? You know, when we're dealing with state dollars, they say it's 3 times or 4 times what our savings are. So we can save $500 million in doing changes of that nature, then that goes down to $2 billion. We're still looking at a $9 billion problem.
Okay, but so if this is in fact the case, then when Andrew Cuomo says there will be no new taxes, then you say that's not possible unless you borrow money.
Absolutely. You know, I don't want to borrow just like no one else wants to borrow. And at the governor's press conference yesterday, he talked about the fiscal crisis in New York City back in 1975, and how the the city workers then came to the quote-unquote rescue of New York City.
Yep.
Well, that's not altogether factual. What happened back in 1975 is tens of thousands of New York City employees were transferred to the state of New York's payroll. The employees did give up 3 years of projected or promised pay raises, and the Municipal Assistance Corporation issued $6 billion of bonds.
The MAC bonds, the infamous MAC bonds.
The infamous Big MAC bonds. And of that $6 billion of bonds, the pension system bought $3 billion worth of it. So $3 billion went out into the overall market.
Sort of a shell game, it sounds like,
yeah,
a little bit.
And the only reason that then Wall Street backed it is because I think it was Merrill Lynch at the time had over 20% of their total assets tied up in New York City paper. So they said this is a good thing to do. We have to push the bonds. Otherwise, we would have had the Wall Street meltdown back in '75 that we just experienced 2 years ago.
Okay, but here's the rub. Richard Ravitch, the former lieutenant governor, had this grand plan. In fact, Richard Ravitch was deeply involved in what you're talking about right now, back in the 1970s, in quote-unquote saving New York, right? Mm-hmm. So he comes in as David Paterson's lieutenant governor. He's specifically brought in by David Paterson because of his experience in the 1970s. He puts together a grand plan. The grand plan includes borrowing, and it is immediately rejected by everyone, including Andrew Cuomo. So it seems like then borrowing is not something that the current governor wants to do.
He probably doesn't. The Assembly did not poo-hoo it like everyone else
That's true,
did.
they did not.
We looked at it and said that even though we don't want to borrow, I mean, right now our debt is close to $55 billion overall, and to increase it another $3 or $4 billion will bring it up to close to 60. But the real cost to the state at that point would be the increase in debt service. So it would go from $5 billion a year of debt service maybe to $5.5 billion. That makes it manageable to run the state. Our total state payroll, if you take every employee of the state of New York, comes to a little less than $7 billion. If we eliminated every employee, we'd still have a $2 billion problem, and we'd have no state.
Right.
So you can't just cut, and cutting employees really doesn't work.
Well, and also it should be noted that the governor has suggested that he wants a year-long freeze in salaries, and that the savings from that is just 200 to 400 million with an
Right.
M
With an
dollars.
M, right.
Right. That is not even making a dent really in a $9 to $10 billion budget hole.
You know, we have to really find serious money to fix the problem that we have.
Okay. But would you not agree that when the governor talks about bloat or problems or reining in state expenses or spending more than we have and needing to cut down to the bone, do you not agree that there is room for cutting somewhere?
Yes, there was always room to cut. There's always room to cut. But is state spending runaway? If you look at the components of where this $133 billion is spent, like I say, $91 billion of it is aid to localities. If we cut any of that, that's almost a direct translation into a tax increase at the local level. We cut school aid, schools still need the funds to operate, they raise the property taxes. If we cut Medicaid, we're not going to get the money from the Fed, so that hurts us even more, and people will not be helped. You know, $5 billion goes to debt service. State operations, the entire state is run on, I believe it's $19 billion to run everything, every department, every agency, the legislature, the executive, everything is on $19 billion. I can't see where he wants to cut, where we can cut it.
What, just in closing, what about the millionaires tax? Now, this is the 3-year temporary PIT surcharge, personal income tax surcharge, that was on very wealthy New Yorkers, that is supposed to sunset at the end of this year, 2011.
Yes.
The governor has said no new taxes. I want to let that sunset. Your leader, Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver, has also said, okay, no new taxes. We want to work with the governor. So do you think that's a non-starter?
Well, the last time we did that, it resulted in the commuter tax being eliminated in New York City, when we just agreed with someone who we knew their idea wasn't as good as they claimed it to be. If the millionaire tax is allowed to continue, in my eyes, it's not a new tax, it's a continuation of an existing tax. The argument has been that we're going to lose population, people are going to move. That's not true. New York State gained 2 million residents over the last 10-year period. This is including the time when we had tax increases. Some people said that the reason we're losing 2 congressional seats is because of the flight of the wealthy from New York. That is totally untrue. For the past 40 years, New York has lost 1 or 2 congresspeople because the growth in other parts of the state is greater than it is here.
Well, Assemblyman, you are at this moment a voice in the wilderness, but I suspect that probably there will be more people joining you soon. I want to thank you very much, Gary Pretlow, for joining us, and
My
we will
pleasure.
be speaking to you again.